and make him come back and get it tomorrow, would be my guess. Well, there's
That's
just
smart.
too much of it. You
Like,
can't
that's
just do it
better.
all at once, you know. Got to be realistic. If you're
Sure.
making an exception for one person, the next person is going to expect it, and the next person is going to expect it. And after 30 years of doing that, it's like you can't do that. You just simply have to say no, and they have to understand that
Yeah.
you're busy and that you're doing people in order, and that's the best they can expect.
That's right. I have a feeling that people who are listening to this are not the people who show up without getting a setup 5 minutes
I would
before
like
the
to hope
shop
so.
closes. Surely not. Hey, have you guys ever met before? Have you guys talked before at all?
What's up, brother?
James, meet Josh.
Definitely seen some of the videos for sure, but I don't know if you've seen any of ours. But
Did you just get your hair cut?
Oh yeah, buzzed
man.
it, baby.
Oh, that's disappointing,
dude. I've been growing mine out. I've been trying. I was trying to grow the mullet so that I could match if we went hunting this year.
Yeah, so every August I'll buzz the head like this for hunting season. I don't want the hair when I'm out there, so get rid of it, you know.
Yeah, no, I get that. That was before my mohawk. I used to shave it to skin, and then the last 4 years or 5 years, I went, let's have a little fun with this, and kind of just stuck, and that's why I have it. It looked good on film, so I'm like, I'm just gonna leave it and see how it goes and how ridiculous it looks. And you know, being a divorcee and you know on the market, it's you ooze confidence if you walk into a room with a mohawk and a big beard.
Oh,
so it doesn't
for
hurt.
sure, for sure.
That's the goal. You're trying to attract the kind of woman that wants a man.
I think after I hit like 35, I just said I don't care anymore. I really don't. I don't care what people think. I don't care whether I offend you or you don't like me. It's not my problem. Then you're just not my cup of tea, and we're not meant to be. And that's totally fine. I'm myself, and that's the end of it. I just don't care. No.
Yeah, dude. I love it. So I had some questions. And so like James and I are at different places in our archery journey, and James just like shoots and has a damn good time doing it, and his stuff looks like it's in tune because he's freaking hitting tight, nice dots out to 80, and I am just ever messing with stuff. And so one of the things that I thought would be interesting to talk about, when I change something, I tend to change something that's expensive. Like I'll order like a full new 24 arrows, or I'll change my release. What I'm curious about is, what do you think the cheapest things you can change to your setup are that make the biggest difference?
The biggest changes you can make to your setup are actually functional as opposed to equipment, to be honest. If your bow is not tuned perfectly well, it's kind of difficult to improve. You can adjust, you know, how stiff something is, or manipulate your arrow spine to try to make your bow work a little better when it's out of tune. But getting your bow to where everything's just dead nuts perfect is super critical, which is why I'm more of an advocate for that garbage bow tech, I believe, were some of your phrases you've left on my pages. You cannot get a bow to tune perfectly if you can't get the cams to point perfectly at each other at draw. And it's one of the only bows that is easy to do it with. I've started a video series more than anything to show people how much they move when you're trying to move them left and right. The video I launched this morning was explaining paper tuning just with wheel lean and not moving the rest at all. Trying to get people to realize that the orientation of these things are what makes your bow shoot straight. And when you don't have a system that has more of a finite movement left to right, you're kind of screwed in that regard. And like I did a Matthews top hat video like 3 or 4 weeks ago, where I went through each set of top hats and showed how much it moved from at draw, not at rest, but actually pull the bow back and see if the cams are pointed at each other and how much each position moved it and changed it. And you'll move it, you know, a minimum quarter inch to half inch. And if you're trying to get, like the Hoyts were like a half inch, it was a lot. And if you're trying to get those things to shoot optimally, it's damn near impossible to do it if you can't get them perfectly straight. And very few systems allow for that. So your only other options are to be able to finitely move a rest, and then you're taking everything out of a culmination of square. And when you start trying to shoot past like 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, you start to see it separate no matter what you do. There's no way around it. So that's part of why I really like that system. I also like the fact that they're trying to make it more user-friendly and more average guy accessible, instead of I need an expert to touch my, pristine piece of equipment because it's too complicated for me. None of this shit's complicated. It's really not. Most of these bows are actually very simple if you understand how they work, and I want to lower that barrier of entry for people. I want you to not be afraid to work on your bow. I believe everyone should work on their own bow. That's why I put out the content that I put out. That's why I'm trying to do what I'm trying to do, because I want us all to grow better as a group. And if you don't understand the finite parts of tuning your bow, you're never going to get that much better, because you're going to get to a certain point and then you're always going to question whether it's you or the equipment. If you know how to work on your bow, you know it's you, and you can blame yourself instead of questioning your gear. So I didn't really answer your question effectively well, but the most important thing is getting your bow perfectly. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. James, what bow tech do you shoot? Because James shoots a bow tech.
I've shot bow tech since 2005, actually, so I've shot a bunch. But the one I shoot right now is the SR350, which actually me and Josh both had some reviews that did some numbers on the bow when it came out. It kind of shook our niche, let's say that, because it came in a lot slower than they said it was going to, essentially. And he did one first. We both did it. Like, we both had pre-filmed them and dropped them the day they came out. I think his dropped like an hour earlier or something. And yeah, it caused a ruckus for sure. But I regardless of the speed of the bow, I mean, I shoot it in comfort. I love the bow, Yeah.
Did you get a phone call from them at all?
Did I what?
Did you get a phone call from them about your video?
No. No, I didn't. I know you did. I watched your follow-up.
Yeah, I kind of did, and they didn't like it very much. But I was like, hey, is there something I put in here that's inaccurate or untrue? And if you don't like that,
what do you shoot your? Do you generally shoot in comfort or performance, or is it for you kind of like bow to bow?
I shoot in performance on every bow tech I've ever had, just because of the velocity difference for the feel difference to me isn't drastic enough. So I try to always get the most performance out of a bow as possible. I'd rather put the bow in performance and back the peak weight down a little bit for feel.
I mean, the reality is it's just that like last 3 inches just feels like shit in performance mode. But who cares? You just get used to it.
I feel, to be honest. I that's one thing I always tell people when you go try a new bow. Like, and I think this is an underappreciated part of going and testing bows if you're going to buy a new one, is you do get used to your draw cycle. So like if you draw a bow that absolutely feels like dog shit, but then you go shoot the SS34, which is buttery smooth, it will feel like shit at first because you're used to what you've been shooting. So it really takes some reps to stand there in the pro shop and shoot the bow to like kind of get used to the new draw cycle. At least I feel that way.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true, and it's amazing how much a garbage draw force curve will feel good after a month. You just get used to how it feels. And I've told people that a lot, that when they're trying out something, I wouldn't necessarily weigh it on the draw force curve, because it's something you get used to, which is why a Matthews guy will tend to be a Matthews guy, and why a Bowtech guy will tend to be a Bowtech guy, because he gets used to the draw force curve and it feels like home to him. And when he tries something else, it feels weird. So it doesn't mean that weird is worse or anything off of that. It's just it's what you're used to. No different than a Chevy guy's a Chevy guy, a Ford guy's a Ford guy, and a Dodge guy's a Dodge guy. You know, it's just kind of how it works.
Yeah.
But how do you bring somebody out of that like mental rut? Because I do find the exact same thing. Like I've shot, Matthews has been kind of my go-to for the last 6 years pretty consistently, because it feels like a bow should feel to me. But if I didn't have a draw board and a press and all that crap, Matthews is one of the worst ones to try to work on, like by yourself. Like the Bowtech, so much more.
Yeah, they're definitely a lot more difficult. But the only way you're going to break yourself out of that is if you give another bow a real chance, not a 5-day chance. You give it like a 2-month chance, and then you give yourself the opportunity to really get used to it and really get comfortable with it. That's really about the only way. I mean, a Matthews is almost always going to feel good to you until they change their draw force curve. which come out with a new cam system because basically they haven't changed that cam system in quite a long time. I mean, even pre-Halon almost feels exactly the same. So if what they come out with is different and the draw force curve feels different, that's really your opportunity to try something else and see what you like, because that bow is going to feel weird too.
Valid. All right. I want to go back to my initial question a little bit more, because I still think, I was thinking about this, like watching John Dudley do some of his stuff, one of his testing stuff. I changed two things. I went to the shop and I bought new nocks, and I re-de-looped one of my bows that I felt like I was getting a little bit of knock pinch on. And then I bought 100 grain points instead of 125s, and I shot them against each other. And what was interesting was the 100 grain were grouping slightly better at 60 yards than the 125. So did you watch any of his series?
I watched a little of
Josh,
it.
did you
It's hard to take the time, honestly, at this point, and the time of year that it is for me. But I did watch a little bit of it, and I kind of got the gist of what he was saying is stop, dicking around with all this stuff and shoot your bow, which I totally get. And I can appreciate that, because at the end of the day, the thing that's going to make you the best is practice, and good practice, not just shooting your bow, but shoot your bow for good success, and don't shoot shots that are bad. Force yourself to shoot good shots only, and stop when you're not shooting well and come back to it. But what you're probably experiencing, Brandon, is shooting too weak of an arrow. If you put a 100 grain tip on, you had a 125 and your group gets better, the only functional reality is that your arrow was too weak, because more weight in front of your arrow will always group better as long as you have adequate spine. So you're probably on the weak side of what you should be using, or you have some inconsistent knock travel that a stiff arrow or an overly stiff arrow is covering up. Because if you don't have perfect travel and perfect line, when you have an overspined arrow, it corrects it somewhat. It won't flex as far out of center, because everything about that line is trying to keep the knock and the point in the same line when they come out of the bow. And if your arrow is too stiff, it won't flex as far. If it won't flex as far, it doesn't seem to miss by as much or deviate quite as much. So at the end of the day, if you put lighter tips on and shoot a better group, you're shooting too weak of an arrow, and you probably ought to try a stiffer arrow.
So what I found interesting was in John's video, he shows basically a really tight group, and then he shows a looser group above and a looser group below. And what he basically done was, I can't remember if he changed point weight or if he just changed the actual poundage of the bow to try to find the sweet spot. But mine weren't nearly as drastic. Obviously, I don't think I'm as good a shot as he is. But another thing it kind of brought up that I wondered was, is a weak spined arrow always going to deviate the same way? Like, is the impact downrange always going to be the same?
If it's too weak, in theory, it's supposed to shoot to the right, and it's supposed to shoot low out of a release. But that doesn't mean it always will. It just simply means that's the indicator without fletching on the arrow. If fletching is on the arrow, that doesn't mean its impact point's going to go there. It's only take the fletching off.
That makes sense, because, right. And if you knock-tuned one that was weak in a compound bow, I'm sure you could change the impact point downrange. That makes sense. Okay. So, because that's what I was wondering, if there was like if you're hitting to the right consistently, you may have a weak spined arrow. But
I don't really buy that one. That's only going to show up when you're shooting broadheads that are fixed blade, or when you don't have fletching on your arrow. Impact, it's not really truly going to impact. That's the premise of what Easton's original technical bulletin said, is that if you were stiff, you'd impact left, and if you were weak, you'd impact right. But that I've only really seen that to be true with a modern compound with true center shot clearance on shafts or fixed broadheads, not just field pointed fletched arrows. You're not going to see that.
Yeah. And that is what I noticed when I increased. So I shot those iron wheel wide 150s. So I went from 125s to 150s, and the wides were hitting 6 inches to the right of my 125s. So I just adjusted my scope to go do my bear hunt at 15 yards. So it didn't really, it didn't matter. But
yeah, hey, that's where you want to be bow hunting, though. I mean, I think we kind of touched on it last one with T-Bone, but I think so many guys go out expecting that I'm comfortable shooting out to 110 yards, and I'm like, why don't you just become better at stalking or like better at sitting longer? And like, to me, that makes sense. It's like, try to close the gap as close as possible and be a really good shooter. You know what I mean? But sometimes it seems like people just are, I'm at 80 and I can do it, so I'm going to let one fly, even though the animal is still bedded under a tree and the wind's
Guilty.
good. You know what I mean?
Guilty.
Right? Like, that seems crazy to me. It always has. Like, but hunting skill and shooting skill, and like, obviously you guys both know more about like arrow weights and stuff. You know, I just kind of shoot. But like, I think if you can hunt really well and shoot really well, you can get away with a lot more setups than if you hunt like shit and shoot like shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, there's definitely pluses to be had, and it would be nice if we were all better hunters in general and had better skill. And I emphasize the long distance stuff more than anything for like a follow-up shot, because in general the goal is to be able to get, you know, inside 40 and preferably inside 20 if you can. That's ideal, but inside 40, and I like to think just about anybody's pretty damn proficient with the kind of equipment we have today. But the bigger issue you run into is if you don't make a perfect shot, and you can get in a given buffer when you're trying to sneak up on something, and that number's usually around 100 yards. If that animal's injured and it knows you're there, it'll let you get to about 100. And I'd much rather feel like I was proficient enough to hit it, because I know if I look at the situation and I know I'm not going to be able to get any closer than I am, and I've already got an arrow in that animal, I'm going to shoot. And I would much rather feel like I'm capable. Shooting at 100 makes 50 seem really easy. Shooting at 150 makes 100 pretty easy.
Agree. Yeah.
And as you do those things, it tightens you up.
I agree 100%. I wasn't saying don't practice at long range. Like, I love practicing at long range. And I'm totally with you on the follow-up shot. Something my dad taught me way early bow hunting was like, even if you pumped, like, pinwheel an animal, but it goes off and stands there, unless it's wobbling, just shoot it again. You know, always put those follow-ups. So I agree with you 100%. I'll have newer buddies who are hunters, and they go, oh, I'll never shoot past 60. I go, that's fine, but let's get your tape to where it's, because in the instance that you need a follow-up and you already have one in there, you're going to want to mark, you know?
Well, the reality, if you're sighting it into 100, your 60 mark's more accurate than if you're just sighting it into 60, because you're getting information beyond that shows you ballistic drop, and that makes sure you're actually sighted in at 60 yards. Just because your sight goes that far doesn't mean you're going to shoot that far. But everything you do to stretch it out farther and farther and farther and farther. I just found out last week that Archer's Advantage actually can go up to 200 yards. I thought it capped out at 150. But those numbers, the farther ballistically you put them in there, the tighter and closer the numbers up front are. So why not do it?
Yeah, I watched that video. I actually watched that video you did last night, kind of like getting ready to talk to you. I watched that 200-yard video, and I thought that was pretty cool. One question I had about that video is you said that having the peep higher from the D-loop would get you more throw.
It will.
I'm curious why that is.
Because you're positioning your eye higher above the arrow. So if you think of the arrows in a given line, right, your sight and your eye are going to be equal to the, let's see if I can get the screen. There you go. Your sight and your eye are going to be equal in the distance above the arrow to get a given aiming point. So if you raise this goes up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you can functionally anchor well with your peep higher in the string, you're starting with your 20 yards higher above the arrow. Because the thing that stops you in distance is either you run out of sight travel or you run into your arrow path, right? So if you start the beginning of your travel higher up on the arrow path, you have more range before you run into it. So it's part of why I like to use that bigger nose button, is it makes my head sit up a little higher, and the higher your head sits, the higher your eyeball is above the arrow, but still feeling like you have a good anchor point. That simply allows you to shoot farther. No different than like shortening your release as much as possible if you're shooting a wrist strap style, shortening your loop as much as possible. All those things push your head into the string more, which would make your head sit up higher, which will make your peep be higher, which will make you be able to shoot farther.
Makes sense.
Like, James, if you go just push your peep up like a quarter of an inch, at 20, you'll be impacting like off the target high.
Wow.
It's really sensitive with how much of a difference it can make.
Yeah, so everything you do to get a good anchor point and still raise it a little bit just gives you a little bit more range.
But I'll say this, like the Matthews I've got now, my peep is a little low at 60, and it actually, it forces me to kind of like, I feel like I'm kind of squinched and I'm more shaky. My sweet spot on that bow is at 70. When I'm at 70, because it's just changing something with where my face is with the peep and with the housing at 70, because I'm moving my slider down just a hair, all of a sudden I feel like a freaking rock between 70 and 100. It's really goofy.
Well, it's not goofy. It's realistic from where your peep is set. Your peep is set for 80, 85 yards. That's why it feels really good in 70 to 100. And that's usually why I tell people who are shooting a slider, I tell them to set their peep at about 50 to 60 yards. So when you're shooting that close stuff, you're scrunched into it a little bit, but it's way easier to be accurate on the close
right
stuff. But if you bump that thing out to 100, your nose is at least still touching the string, because what you're doing is you're pushing your face down in and pulling your face off. And if you get to a point that your nose isn't even touching anymore, it's really hard to be accurate, especially at distance. You need those additional points of contact to be accurate.
So you use a nose button on your setup?
Yeah, no, I do. As much as it seemed gimmicky to me, I tried it, and it was actually somewhat painful at first. I could really feel it like a lot. Like the first one I did, I actually ran a lighter over it to try to soften the points because it was like uncomfortable, especially when I had to take a close shot and push my face into it more. It actually hurt a lot more. But it's noticeable. I really do think it helps, as much as it does seem kind of gimmicky, and I'm not a gimmicky kind of guy in general, but it allows me to set my head up a little higher on the string and still feel like I have a good solid anchor point. And I've been shooting really long distance stuff for like really dinking with it for several years, and that it gave me another 10 yards of range just because my head set up a little higher and my
that's
a little higher. Yeah, so it just brings it up a little bit more.
James, have you met one before?
No, never. They look interesting. I feel like it makes sense, plants your nose in the same spot more consistent than just along the string. But no, I haven't tried one. Have you?
Yeah, I had one on for probably a season, and then I changed strings and I just never put it back on. But I probably, I'm always messing around with stuff. I probably ought to throw it back on there. When they ship you a small one and a big one.
Yeah,
it's like a pack.
They say the big one's for recurve, but I just put the bigger one on because it let me set my head up higher.
That's so interesting to think about. Okay, all right.
Hold on, there's a good question here. Can you each tell us what your current arrow broadhead is? Yeah, I shoot the Gold Tip 300 Velocity Pro, 30 grain inserts up front with just a Rage tri-pan. I love Rage, ran them for like 10 years now, and they do some damage for sure. That's what I run. It's 422 grains.
422. All right, Josh, what are you running?
Well, it depends on what I'm hunting. I'm one of those people. I have like several bows. My antelope setup is actually that ridiculous 200-yard bow, and I'm using an RIP Extreme Velocity 350 with a 30 grain titanium prototype insert, Grim Reaper Fatal Steel 100 grain. The new DCA Super Saber 2 inches. They sent me them like 2 weeks ago, and a Halo knock. And then I have an elk setup that I haven't 100% finalized, but that'll be a RIP TKO 300 with 50 grain titanium. I haven't decided what broadhead yet for sure. I shot Fatal Steels last year and really liked them, but I'm not 100% committed yet. I'll probably shoot I still want to do a fixed blade and try that DCA with a fixed blade. So I'll probably shoot a Micro Hades Pro in 100 grain on that with the 2-inch ones, because I want to see if it'll stabilize a fixed blade at a higher speed, and I'll probably be in the low 300s with that bow. And then I have a tree stand ground blind setup that's got I think it's still a RIP TKO, but I'm shooting I think it's a Carnivore, bigger 4-blade, just because it's close distance and I know I'll penetrate, so I'm worried about it. And I think that still has Silent Night SK2s on it and halos with 50 grain titanium insert.
So the titanium, I tried to look on your website because I wanted to order some, but I couldn't find them. Are you doing like limited run stuff, or did I just not look hard enough?
You didn't look hard enough. Just type titanium in the search. But yeah, I have in titanium, I have a 50 grain 5mm 204 insert. I have a prototype 30 grain that we're going to run because I had enough people ask for them. So it might be another week or two before those come out. And then I have a 4mm titanium 50 grain as well. And those just came back in stock today. I was out of those for about a week, but I have had the 5mm. I think I've only ever been out of stock in the last 3 months for like 3 days is all. I think I have 4,000.
Look hard enough. Yeah, I want to order the titaniums for the 204 RIP TKOs. I cut them they're probably 1.5 inches longer than my normal setup, so I've got some room to cut them back and stiffen them up a little bit. James, let me ask you a question. After the conversation that we had last time, because T-Bone jumped in, which was freaking sweet. Like, it was so cool to have him come in.
Yeah.
Did he convince you to add any weight to your arrow at all, or are you going to just keep rocking the 422?
Man, it's funny. This season I'm going to run it. I mean, I leave Friday for a buffalo hunt that I'm filming for my buddy, and then I'm going elk hunting right after that. So I'm not going to change it. It's like too close. I've shot a bunch of bulls with the same arrow and it's worked. So we're going to run it again. We're going to run it back. But when I get back from that, I think y'all convinced me to maybe bump up to like 475. The stuff he was saying I felt like made so much sense. And because my bow is, 300 feet a second, I feel like I got some room to go up in weight and just try it for a while and see how I like it. I would be curious Josh's view on this. Like, am I going to see much of a difference? 422 to 475? What's the deal?
This is probably one of the spots where I would probably disagree with T-Bone. We've talked a lot and where we see eye to eye a lot. But I still really struggle with the velocity not being the most important thing. And this is from a guy that's worked in a shop for, 30 plus years now. I can't even tell you how many bows I've built and how many customers I've dealt with over the years. The number one problem I've ran into is the animal moved before my arrow got there. And I noticed Brandon was making a comment about, well, it's only a 20th of a second. Go back and slow-mo a 20th of a second on deer ducking. It moves a lot in a 20th of a second. It doesn't sound like a big number, but it's a huge fucking number. It's a lot of movement. So to me, I'd rather know I hit the animal where I was aiming and let my arrow not penetrate because it doesn't have enough energy in that regard than my arrow slowed down, so I've got more than enough energy, if that's really a thought, which I believe we all have more than enough energy. I believe you have more than enough, and I believe you have more than enough regardless for what you're shooting. I think this is all really blown out of proportion. I mean, I killed my first bear at 11 years old with a 400 grain aluminum arrow and shot all the way through him and stuck in the ground a foot behind him in the dirt with a 40-pound bow. This is all about the broadhead, people. It's all the broadhead. It is not.
Yeah. See, I do agree with this. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I like speed. I do, but
if you're running adequate arrow spine, right? If your arrow is adequately spined, like where Brandon's just kind of proving to himself that his is a little weak, right? If your arrow's weak, your arrow is tracking out of a central point. So as it's flying through the air and bending out of center, should I compensate for that? It's losing energy with every movement it makes because it's bending farther to try to come back to its center point. That's why adequate spine is so important. That's why I generally gravitate towards a little too stiff. I would rather know that it's stiff enough than push the envelope a little bit, which one of my setups is probably on the weak side, but I was trying to prove a distance and a point, so I went that way. I generally wouldn't shoot a 350 spine arrow. But if you're shooting an adequate spine and your arrow is strong enough to handle the impact, most of the failures that you're going to see are in the insert, which is why I made inserts. I didn't really care. In fact, I talked to Bill for 2 years asking him to make that insert. I was like, would you please just make this insert? Like, I'm telling you, it'll do really good. And he didn't see it was necessary and relevant. So I ended up having somebody over, it wasn't Instagram, it was YouTube actually reached out to me and was like, hey, I can make that for you. And that's who's making my inserts for me. And it's worked out pretty good. But the failure isn't in weight. It's not. It's in adequate componentry and good freaking broadheads. And I've seen it forever. I've seen it over my entire life. What's different in the past 20 years? I mean, how long you guys both been shooting bows?
I've shot bows. I shot my first animal with a bow in '98.
Okay.
No, seriously, 10 years. Seriously.
Okay. So Brandon's probably not been shooting this long enough to know what broadheads used to look like versus what they look like today in general.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But what were you shooting for broadhead? Thunderhead, right?
Classic.
Right. Okay. And your Thunderhead was long and narrow.
Yep.
It did not look like this. It looked like that, right? Now, granted, not my favorite head in the world because they were really soft and you were pretty easy to bend, but we used to shoot elongated broadheads, or broadheads that were a lot longer than they are wide. So many broadheads today are almost as long and wide as equal. It's a lot harder to cut with that. It takes a lot more force to cut. And we're shooting stuff with chisel points on the front that isn't super sharp to the tip. Those things make a big difference. Hide on like an elk, for example, is like modern day leather armor. It's thick and it's hard to cut. It makes a big difference how sharp your projectile is, which is why iron wills do such a good job, is because they're so sharp. They're cutting through the hide. It's not, I don't believe it's the overall design of it. I think it's more how sharp the freaking thing is, because it's just super sharp so it doesn't lose that force. I believe wholeheartedly if you have a really good sharp broadhead, an adequate spine, the weight is almost irrelevant because so many of these configurations have an adequate spine behind them. So when it tries to hit the object, the arrow doesn't have the right force to keep the energy in the arrow, and it'll snap the arrow off or bend a component or push it in a different direction because it's not bending perfectly straight to the target. I've watched it for years. It's a big freaking deal.
Are you saying it's kind of like, you know, doing like a swimming fish through the air so it's not hitting like with direct straight force, essentially, if it's underspined? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So what I mean by that, and if I could draw down on a board, I would. So there's, on a perfectly spined arrow, let's say your arrow is 28 inches. Okay, your front node is at like 26, and your back node is at like 2. And those 2 points never deviate their line as that arrow is bending back and forth. Those 2 exact points stay in the same spot. If you're adequate spined, those aren't equal to each other. So the ass end's moving around. So when it hits something, the ass end isn't going straight through the front end, and it does that, and you lose energy. It's like stupid important for those to be in line with each other, which is why tuning a bow is so important, because an adequately tuned bow shows you where the bend point is more accurately. If you're trying to make your arrow work in an untuned bow, you're not seeing what it's actually doing and you're forcing it somewhere else. That's why moving your wheel lean around to tune your bow is way more important than moving your arrow rest. You shouldn't ever move your arrow rest unless you absolutely have to. You need the knock end of that arrow leaving the bow at the central point of the riser so it's flexing in a straight line. And so many of these tuning methods are alleviating all of that, and that's why you're not storing the appropriate amount of energy in your setup.
I mean, I like this. I like it. My question would be, I like I said, I talked about it in the one we did with T-Bone, but I watched a video of you saying you shot a buffalo with, like, I think it was a 420 grain arrow in a mechanical, right? And that's like what I would do if I went out, you know. I tend not to like overthink and just focus on doing the task. My question is, like, what do you think of Rage? I know you didn't run Rage, but do you like
so it? Like 3 or 4 years ago, I was on Rage's dealer advisory. They had like 8 guys in the country, and I was one of them. And they made like one broadhead I really liked, and they never really advanced with it. I struggle with the big cutting diameters on Western game. Everybody else that was in that dealer council were all hunting deer, right, for the most part, and they didn't have a ton of input. The old hypodermic plus P with an 1.5 inch cutting diameter, that's the only thing I would use, because trying to push a 2 inch bigger swather, your blade's more like that, it's less like that. The more you have this kind of an angle, the farther you're going to penetrate. Will it put as big of a hole in it? And I noticed, I shot the plus P for 3 years on elk, and I had holes I could still put my hand in, but it seemed to penetrate a lot better than anything with a 2 inch cutting diameter, because it was cutting at an angle that was less aggressive. Okay. So once again, to me, it really boils down to cutting through the skin. And the bigger hole you're trying to cut into the skin, the more force you're absorbing in the cutting process, and the less energy you have to penetrate through.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Has Bomar released his broadhead yet? Because he's got a broadhead coming out this month, he said.
I haven't. I don't follow him, so I'm not I'm not
Don't
sure.
lie.
I did seriously. I don't.
You look at all the pictures
Dude, if you
with the
look at
no
my
shirt on.
Instagram, I follow like 28 people total. Like I added you because I didn't know. I added you. I don't follow anybody. I don't look at social media. I ended up in this position because the information that was available was crap. That's the only reason I was doing any of this, because we did a camp with Dan way back when for his first elk shape camp was at my building, and it was from people all around the country. It wasn't local people. So I didn't get a real good interaction with people from outside of my area. And the information and knowledge they had was so bad. I was like, oh my God, I have to do something about this. There's so many basic, easy to explain things that make such a big difference in how your boat performs and how your equipment works, that I felt like I had to do that. And then I feel like it's made a difference, to be honest. Like, I think there's a lot more information out there. I get a lot of good feedback about it. But the first couple of years that I helped Dan with his YouTube channel, I refused to look at it. I never watched a video. I never looked at the comment. Not one. Like, Dan, I don't care. I don't want to see it. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. And eventually, I think Tim actually was the one who talked me into looking at it, because I just wasn't going to look at it. But it was a lot of really positive feedback. And then there's a lot that I couldn't talk about from his standpoint, because he's, has sponsorships, and I wasn't interested in any of that. So I decided to start my own channel so I could talk about whatever the heck I wanted. And a lot of the product reviews that I would see when I would actually start paying attention looked bought to me. They didn't look like it was someone's authentic opinion. It looked like what what the manufacturer wanted that person to say. So I took a different path with how I would try to look at it. I tried to analyze them a little bit and critique them a little bit. And I mean, I've been a big Bowtech fan for a long time. And if there's any integrity to what I'm doing, I would have never put that video out, that SR350 video. Because
I thought that was a good. Not to cut you off, but I think that was a really good video, number one, and it was cool that, with same day, two people went up saying the same thing, and I mean, and then I think when they put out the new cam, I know I did a video redoing it, and I think you did as well, didn't you?
Yeah, when they called me, they said they thought there was something wrong with the bow, and I said, well, you send me whatever bow you want, and I'll do it again. You check it, you do everything with it you possibly can. Put your new module on it, send me that bow, and I'll measure it out and check it and do it again for you. The funny thing was it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was 17 feet, right, is what I got off.
That's a lot.
It is,
That's a lot.
But they're all traditionally close to 10 off anyway.
Which is such
the average. Well, I thought you said that year, didn't you find that the average bows were like 12 feet slow or something, and then the following year, weren't they all way closer?
Well, I know that I know Bowtech for sure. That previous year was that bow was 17 feet slow, and they're 4 feet this year.
As I knew you were going to be checking. They only took one piece of the string out this year. They didn't take 5 out.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with those strings, Brandon. They're just fine.
That's a great Brandon Mcdonald video where you're struggling with the Revolt X for 20 minutes straight.
Dude, I felt so bad, but I just could never get that bow. And Bowtech called me. That video had a crap ton of views for my channel at that time. Bowtech called me and they were like, "Who are you and what are you doing?" And no, they were very nice. But yeah, it's odd. I don't know what it was, man. I'm totally down to I mean, I like what Josh has to say about Bowtech. The fact that you can move those cams left and right so easily, and it's a stable platform now. Because Bowtech for a while had quality control issues, but it seems like pretty much everybody in the industry has worked that kind of stuff out. Like there's not one bow brand now that I think is consistently just blowing up.
No, and that's I'm sure you're referring to a period of time when Bowtech used to buy their limbs from Gordon Glass, and Gordon Glass was going through a buyout, and their employees knew it. And unfortunately, Bowtech ended up with the batch of limbs where they were basically sabotaging the product.
Ugh.
So it wasn't really their fault, but what happened was they decided to bring their limb building process in-house, and their failure rate's like ridiculously low now. the most common thing you're ever going to find wrong with one of them is somebody dry firing it and both cams just collapse because they can't take that.
Yeah, but that's your own fault. I don't have a problem with a bow collapsing if that happens.
Yeah. So they're early 2000s, like 2006, 2009, which I'm sure you've probably seen it. They had a lot of limb problems, Sportsman's Warehouse was selling them.
Yeah.
And stocked Sportsman's Warehouse with limbs in-house because they were replacing so many limbs. That was when Kevin Struther was designing the cam systems. And Kevin Struther's cam systems always had a lot of lateral movement back and forth. And it takes a lot for a one-piece limb to deal with that because the limb fork is moving back and forth every time you fire it, and it'll crack right down the middle. And that's what they dealt with for 2 years. And then somebody else started designing their bows, and the problem went away.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Josh, what do you think the future of bows looks like for the next, what do you think a bow looks like 10 years from now? Where are we at?
Well, I think the reality of what we're looking at, honestly, is it's going to look a lot different. Whatever it is, it's not going to look anything like it looks now, or our industry is going to get real stagnant because that means they ain't going to go faster. And speed, feel, and weight are the three things to sell a bow, right? They already feel really good and are really fast in general, right? So they can only get a little lighter. You get too light from where they are now, and they won't point for shit. You got to have a certain amount of weight in the riser to get some stability and overall feel. So I think there's going to have to be some really large breakthrough that changes how much energy a bow can produce. I mean, they're like 87% efficient right now.
I think that's what
internal combustion engine's like 38% efficient. The thing's twice as efficient as the motor of your car.
Wow.
I mean, what more are you going to do with that piece of equipment? It's got to look a lot different, whether it's involving like pulleys or something like that to be able to take a 500-pound limb and reduce it down to like 70 pounds. So then there's a shit ton of force or something. I'm really not sure because I haven't seen anything from anybody, even on the insider stuff that I see, that looks all that different. So someone's going to have to create something that is just ridiculously special. Even if we, make titanium cams or not, like your bougie fucking $5,000 bow video. I watched that. That was good. Like, what the hell is this? I better watch that.
It's a great video.
You could squeeze another 10 to 15 probably out of what they're building if there was no price restriction on the equipment involved. But that's it. You're not going to get much more than that.
Oof. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you going to do?
I feel like you could get a lot more speed, but the bow's going to feel like a bag of ass, So like you said, it has to have feel too,
I don't know, man. If you take an average limb and flex it, it's like got 300 pounds of load on it right now. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not really a 70-pound limb. The cam and assembly system reduces it. So it's got stupid amounts of load. I don't think you're going to get a lot more speed. I don't think you're probably ever going to see a 400 foot per second bow. And the real question here is, what are you gaining? Like if we're going to get from, let's say 350 is really how fast bows go on peak, right? Yeah, you can argue it. Yeah, there's some out there that are a little faster, some are slower. But let's say 350 is about the peak. To get to 400 feet a second, that string's going to move a whole lot faster. So now your arrow's got to be stiffer to absorb it. Well, now your arrow's heavier, right? So could you make it to where it would go that fast? Maybe. But are you going to be able to improve arrow technology enough that you can get to a 200 spine arrow that isn't, more than 9.5 grains an inch or 10 grains an inch, right?
Yeah.
Like you're still going to need that, what you're sending out of the bow to be able to absorb this energy that's created. You look at 20 years ago, everybody was using a 400 spine arrow at 70 pounds. Nobody does that anymore for the most part. If they have any sense, they're shooting a 340 to a 300 spine arrow at 70 pounds. Why? It's because that bow's producing more energy. So you need a stiffer arrow to absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing you're really going to see a drastic improvement on, in my opinion, is getting arrows lighter at stiffer spines. There's no point in raising the one if you can't raise the other, because you're just going to end up with a 550 grain arrow to absorb that energy. And yeah, it's going to be slower than what, you're shooting now, right? But it'll have more energy. But in the real world, it already has way more than enough energy. Way more than enough. Guys are killing elk with a 50-pound recurve.
Yeah,
we're producing
exactly.
3 to 4 times that amount of energy. and yet you're not getting pass-throughs. Why? It's your fucking broadhead, dude. You're shooting the wrong broadhead if you care about penetration. And in my opinion, you can't have great penetration in a big hole. You can't have great penetration in a great blood trail. They both don't exist. It's really hard to guarantee both. You can pick one or the other, and there's a lot of validity to something I did hear Bomar say. I do not follow him, but I saw something come up. I saw something that came up that he made a really good point. He said the recovery rate on a mechanical broadhead is higher, regardless of whether it goes through or not, because it's doing more damage. And
I believe that.
He's validly right. I would agree that.
They did a really interesting study at the Army base that was up here outside of Clarksville, because they let hunters go in, and they basically asked all the guys what their setup was. And you're right, in that instance, the mechanicals won as far as recovery rate goes.
It will, because it's putting a bigger hole in something. It's just if you hit something in the shoulder or something in an inadequate spot, you're going to run into a bigger problem. But the other mechanical damage.
If you do that, I was thinking about this. The other thing that's nice is if you're using a lighter, faster arrow and you hit it in that like knuckle, you're not going to kill the animal. Like, he's going to have a real bad day. But unless you get through and puncture that and hit that artery on the inside, he's probably going to just be pissed off for a couple months, and then he's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So why do you want to go through there then? Right?
Yeah, I mean, I shot fixed blades for a long time. I shot the OG Muzzies with the screw-on cap, and I liked them. You know, I shot a bunch of animals with those, and I like that broadhead a lot. But when I switched to the Rage, it's like my mind was blown the first time I saw the hole this thing made. It looked like I hit this thing in the side with an axe.
Yep.
And yeah, the last couple elk I've shot, I blew through one side, hit a rib, broke it on the other side, did not pop the hole. He ran around with the broadhead doing this, bled like crazy, and went down. Did I pass through? No. But did I pass through all of his vitals and then stay around and bounce in there?
Yeah.
To me, I care more about, like Josh said, if I have a garden hose of a blood trail, my chance of finding them and doing more damage, to me, is quite a bit higher than like a Magnus Stinger, which like I'm not hating on. That's probably a great broadhead for penetration because it's long and skinny. Yeah. But it's not doing the damage that a Grim Reaper or a Rage is. So I think it's, you know.
No, I agree with you. My issue with guys that shoot mechanicals is what you really need to do if you're going to shoot a mechanical is you better shaft tune your bow, or you better shoot a fixed blade and tune your bow with a fixed blade and then put your mechanical.
Okay.
Because a mechanical is going to hide your errors.
Go into this more.
Okay, so when you shoot a mechanical broadhead, it's like shooting a field point, but not always. There's almost always a little bit of deviation because there's a little more surface area. But it'll hide your inadequacies in your arrow flight, right? You don't want to hide your inadequacies in your arrow flight. You want to know it's flying inadequately, because then you can correct it. You can figure out what the problem is, whether it's a wheeling issue, whether it's a spine issue, whether it's, you know, your arrows are too long, whether you're shooting, you know, a 350 and you should be shooting a 300, whether your tip weight's too heavy. All those things are going to present themselves with a fixed blade broadhead, and they're not going to present themselves with a mechanical. So if you don't take that extra step, if you don't tune your bow with a fixed blade broadhead, even if you intend to shoot a mechanical, you're not going to figure out what's going on with the arrow, and you're still bleeding energy. So that arrow is still wobbling, remember? It just because it doesn't deviate from its impact point doesn't change the fact that it's wobbling inadequately in flight. So it's not storing as much energy, so when it hits the animal, it doesn't go in as far. And that's really where the mechanical broadhead problem is because you're not finitely tuning your equipment before you put that broadhead on. So if you're not going to shoot a fixed blade broadhead, you need to shaft tune your bow and make sure your shaft and your fletched arrow are hitting in the same spot.
So
because that'll then determine
a true bear shaft tune
is adequate.
An actual bear shaft tune. That's what you're talking about when you're saying shaft tuning.
Yeah, but you got to have weight on the back of the arrow where the fletchings are, or just pick up a fixed blade broadhead and tune with that, and make sure you get your field point and your broadhead to hit in the same spot. And if you've done that, which is why I disagree with your just moving your sight thing, is because of the energy transfer, right? So if you get those two to hit in the same spot, then you're equally transferring energy. Then by all means, use a 2-inch gasher, use whatever you want at that point, because you've got all the energy that you're possibly creating and storing, transferring adequately into the object. That's where most of the fuck ups come from.
I love that. That makes so much sense.
You don't think I'm dumb. I want to explain what I was talking about.
Okay.
I was shooting an iron will. Why?
I think you're dumb. I think you made a poor choice.
I just got lazy.
Back the poundage down. It's just as easy.
No, I didn't. That was the thing, is I knew that my shots were going to be 20 or under, and I was hitting this far from my other shaft, and I was like, that's good enough. Let's go. What the problem was when I shit my pants when the 400-pound bear comes into the can, and I'm like, and then low and back. So
yeah. Well, in that situation, if you can't get them to hit the same and you're getting a difference in impact and you need to be in a hurry, back the limb bolts down until they hit in the same spot. Because the reality of that impact being different is you've lost that much energy. You're going to have the same amount of energy, but it's going to fly straight, and you're going to draw it easier, and you're going to sit there and hold it better. So if you're not going to take the time to make your highest level of energy speed system correct, just back it down until they hit the same.
That's a good idea. That's an easy tip for people too. If yeah.
Well, and really, you're transferring the same amount of energy.
Right.
You are,
because
you've led whatever energy you put in the arrow first before it ever got there.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. How far can you back the limb bolts out before you start kind of running into like, this is, now you're running into major like efficiency issues with where it's hitting cable?
Most of your modern bows that have really short limbs, it doesn't really change it that much.
Okay.
If you're talking about 20 years ago, yeah, you do not want to take more than a turn and a half out of a limb bolt because you lose a lot of efficiency. But if you're running short limbs, really squatty limbs, you could take 5 to 10 pounds out and you're still being relatively efficient. The big thing that you're gonna miss is that your length of draw gets longer. Okay. So that's really where the problem lies. So if you're going to try to back it down a little bit and be as efficient as you can, if you're going to take like 2 twists out of limb bolts, you probably ought to put about 3 twists in your string, somewhere around there, so you're maintaining the same draw length. Because if shooting too long of a draw length will make you point all over the place.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's a few comments in here saying how much knowledge MFJJ has. I want to say I've never talked to this dude before today. I'm blown away. This dude is smart. So,
well,
shout out to you, man.
Stick yourself in a pro shop talking to customers all day long, every day for 30 years. You're bound to figure some shit out. It's just part of the deal. But I'm a mechanical person, and I strive to understand how things work, whatever it is, whether it's a washing machine or a bow and arrow or a house. I want to understand how it works because it makes my mind is like not happy if I don't understand it. Like if a bow does something that it's not supposed to do and it doesn't functionally make sense, I won't stop until I figure out why, because it'll drive me up the wall. Because it shouldn't do that. Like when I run into things that don't functionally work right with that, oh God, it just bugs me. And because of that, I've forced myself through every different encounter or experience I could have had over the years to where I don't even get new ones anymore. I imagine I'm gonna at some point have something that comes up that I can't figure out relatively quickly, just because of understanding how the systems work and what's the right way to get the arrow to cast straight. And it just truly is. And I really wish that Bowtech didn't have a patent on that, because that would be on every bow. It would absolutely be on every bow because it works better than anything else. And they have one of the most ingenuitive, effective pieces of equipment that a lot of people don't even understand what it does, because they haven't marketed it well, because they're unlike the marketing company that is Matthews. Bowtech is not a marketing company at all. And they don't do a good job of selling their product. They just make a good product. And they've been one of the companies that has almost always hired somebody from outside of the industry as their engineers, not bow hunting guys that love bow hunting and want to be an archery technician. They want to bring in a mind that thinks different, and they've come up with a lot of different things because of it.
I do have kind of to change the subject, but I was watching a video. Like I said, watching some of your videos last night before we talked today, and I was watching the one where you like replace the core on a moose target. Yeah. That I like that video. It's funny when your daughter was in there for like a little snippet too. But is your shop on that piece of land? I couldn't really tell. So like when you go to the shop, do you have like a 3D range in the back?
Yep.
I couldn't.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
We used to be in downtown Spokane when we had a general sporting goods store, the shop that I started working in when I was like 11 as an archery technician. That was fun.
When
I was 11, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was standing behind a pro shop counter and an archery technician talking to 40-year-old guys explaining archery.
That story that you told Tim in the podcast is awesome.
Yeah, that was fun. But with that, it was just getting thrown to the wolves and seeing what happens. And I'm a relatively resilient person even at that age, so I did okay. But we were there till I think I was about 20, and then we opened up a shop right next door to my family's home because we had learned over time archery is more of a destination sort of business, that if you wanted a good piece of equipment or good help, you would find it. You didn't need to be in town. You didn't need to be somewhere that had excessively high overhead or anything like that. You could put it somewhere where it was cheaper to operate and have a range and have a 3D course and all that. So my facility has a 100-yard flat range and a 18 target 3D course, and there's like 3 3D targets at each shooting position. So, and an indoor range as well.
And he's
so
got
it's all in
elevation, like on the 3D course.
Yeah,
it's badass. It's like the best case scenario.
Yeah, the 3D
That's
course
super.
is
Yeah,
designed
that's
with
cool.
uphills, downhills, and side hills to where you can kind of practice every situation. And we have directly an uphill and a uphill and a downhill, so you can shoot your third axis and just literally go in a circle and keep shooting at targets to check your up and downs. There's not supposed to be a path, but so many people have done it. They've worn a walkway that makes it look like you walk past the targets because you're just shooting the uphill and the downhill and checking your third axis over and over and over until you know it's good.
I mean, it's cool to have a range like right there at the shop. You know, I mean, you can't beat that. How many people work at your shop? I mean, obviously you do a lot of numbers, so.
I'm up to 10 now. I have 10 employees.
Cool.
Josh,
I had
you guys do more volume than, is it about anybody in the country except Lancaster, right?
Depends on what product we're talking about. There are products that I sell more than Lancaster with, but yes, Lancaster's the largest seller of archery goods in the United States, and to my knowledge, I'm the second currently.
A dude with a mohawk.
Yeah.
It's so cool. It's cool.
I was like,
I do agree. I agree with what you said though about people traveling to a good archery shop. I've noticed that because I film a lot of our videos at the bow and arrow shop in Southern California here, and I don't know if you met Bruce before, but from us doing those videos, so many people come from LA or Arizona or Nevada because they see him. And he's like knows a ton, super like good on film and whatnot. And it's cool because it's almost like you said, they make a little vacation out of coming to the bow shop and having Bruce build them a bow or, whatever. And the videos, it's crazy how much reach they get as far as where.
Oh, they do. I actually went on a hunt with Bruce a while back when Black Gold used to do their dealer hunts where they'd bring in like 6 or 7 dealers from around the country, and they'd use that as like a kind of a study group about their products, but they'd go to Texas and do pig hunts and whatnot. And I met Bruce at a pig hunt, and I'm trying to remember what game we were playing that he couldn't beat me. He got really frustrated. I don't remember what it was called, but it was some where you like throw a knife in the ground and then you put your foot at the position and then you throw it in the ground again and then you widen your stance until you can't throw it anymore. And I'm incredibly flexible, and he got really frustrated. He couldn't beat me.
It's some jacked up Russian roulette thing where you're gonna lose a toe with a knife.
Yeah. And honestly, there was many an adult beverage involved, and very one of us would have
Bruce will get it going. I'll tell you what, he has hunted with. I walk into his bow shop one time, and I've known him since I think he bought the shop in like 2004, so I've been friends with him ever since. But I remember I walked in, I like look at his photo board, and I go, Bruce, is that you with Barry Bonds? And he goes, oh yeah, we went on a hunt together last week. And I was like, who just goes hunting with Barry Bonds,
awesome.
And then he has another one with Tony Gwynn, or maybe it was I think he had one with Tony, Ryan Klesko, and Bruce Bochy. I think it was like a whole bunch of baseball players and managers. And I'm like, this dude's like Forrest Gump or something over here, shooting with Barry Bonds, the best baseball player of all time. He's just shooting with him, you know?
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Let's go
crazy.
Let's go through some comments for a few minutes, and let's bounce because we've done an hour.
Go through comments, but I read one a bunch that said, "Are we putting this out?" Yeah, Brandon's going to put this on his YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch it there if you didn't catch the whole thing.
Yeah, and I'll James did a good job editing the one that we did last time, so I'll edit it the same way with all three of our floating heads in the midst. And it'll kind of just be like a podcast, style thing. Unless you want to look at MFJJ for an hour, you can't.
Let's not do that. No.
All right. I mean, did you guys see any other comments come through that were like a really good one that you wanted to answer? There was some really funny comments that came through.
I saw a lot of water jug comments.
Yeah.
The one comment I did see that I wanted to get to was why doesn't Bowtech?
Wait. The slutty Bowman or the slut tie Bowman, or I can't tell what it is. Has one person who's asked a question to these three guys gotten an answer? LOL. No. So why keep firing? Well, I don't know. Just there you go.
I saw a comment about why Bowtech does not lease out the deadlock system, because a lot of boat companies, if people don't know, share their technology and kind of lease them to other brands.
License.
To license it, yeah. Josh would probably know better than me. I'm just assuming they don't because they know it's such a big step that they kind of want to keep it in-house. Is that correct?
That would be my assumption. I mean, I could find out for sure, but I'm betting that they probably have a price that people aren't willing to pay. Plus, the other thing, when it comes to their cam system, it's the most expensive cam system to buy. Like if somebody dry fires their bow and they got to buy the cams, it comes all pre-built and assembled, but you disassemble it off the limb. Like the internals don't come apart. That thing is expensive to make. Even though you look at the price of their bow comparatively, and it's the same or cheaper than a lot of the other main flagship brands when you're looking at it, but they're making a more expensive cam. So it's probably between a combination of how much it actually costs to make it and then how much they would want to license it, or if they were even willing to. But they're also owned by, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, but he's like the wealthiest oil tycoon in the United States. It owns them now, and he's a avid bow hunter. So my guess is he doesn't really care about getting the money. They want to make a more ingenuitive product, along with their Reckoning series that put in the timing adjustment system. Did you see that?
Yes. Yeah, I saw that, and the grip. I thought the grip adjustment was super cool, actually.
The grip's really cool, but the timing adjustment is the only thing I've ever seen in this industry since they've gotten to hard stop cams that you can 100% fully perfectly time your bow. Because anytime you're trying to time one of these things, you're almost always getting one to hit before the other. That system, you can get them to hit at the exact same time without putting something in your cable or whatnot, trying to change the length. You'll get to a point that when you put a twist in or take a twist out or even a half, it's not enough or it's too much. So it just flips from one hitting before the other, right? Well, that system allows you to make a tiny finite adjustment to the length of the cable so you can perfectly time the bow. And I would fully expect that to be on the hunting bows this next year.
Let's get to this question. My sight tape maxes out at 65 yards before hitting my arrow. How can I fix that? Spot hog triple stack.
Well, let's see. Shoot more weight, shoot a lighter arrow, have your peep higher. Is your bow actually tuned? Are you using the top pin for distance or the bottom pin for distance? Because on a 3-pin sight, if you have 20, 30, 40, if you use the bottom pin for your distance, you can shoot 20 yards, 25 yards farther than off of the top pin. So that would get you more to 85, 90 as opposed to your 65. But I'd be willing to bet your peep sight's probably really low. You're probably shooting a heavy arrow and not enough poundage, because those things all contribute to being able to shoot farther away.
We got lots of good comments in here, just not a lot of direct questions that I think would be interesting.
Why doesn't Josh ship to Australia? That's not bad. I ship to Australia, so where's the love?
We ship on a case-by-case basis based off of address, and if someone has some kind of knowledge into what system you can put addresses in to make sure they're not going to get rejected. I used to ship closeout bows or used bows to Australia, and they'd get rejected a lot and sent back, and that's $100 FU from the postal service that's using it. You don't get your money back from that.
I literally just had a hat come back. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, just a freaking hat. That was it.
Yeah. So we're trying, and if we found when we put it into our system, if it simply accepts the address, we'll do it, but we can't just open the floodgates up and let anybody try to buy something, because we'll get more of them rejected than we'll get sent out. So if you want to buy something from the website, email the website your shipping address where it's actually going to and say, can you ship me something? We'll put it in the system. If it accepts it, then it's just a message, buy it. We'll figure out the freight costs, bill you for the freight, and off we go.
Josh, Randy Ackland is asking, what string do you guys use? Are you still making strings?
No, I don't have time.
Who are you using for strings then?
Gas. I've had really good with gas. I personally use exclusively their Ghost blend, which comes in a white or a camo, but I've had really, really good luck with it. I haven't had a serving separate, and I mean, I'm not even making my own for myself.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty anal when it comes to strings. And I figured if I'm not going to make them for people, I need to be able to use somebody else's and say it holds up to my standard. And I have had really good luck with them. And the occasional time where we've had an issue, they immediately send a brand new set, no questions asked. So they've been really great to deal with. And we went from not selling anybody's string to being their #1 dealer in a year.
Okay.
They're great. I mean, they're great strings for sure. That's what I just ran for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've been shooting the last couple of years, and they're pretty good. When talking about mechanical broadheads, is there a real energy loss difference between front and rear deployment?
Are we asking me? Are we asking one of you?
There has to be. It's impossible for there not to be. The question is, do you still have enough to allow the Grim Reaper to fold all the way back and do its thing?
I've shot several front deploy broadheads and had really good luck, but I always have a really high stipulation of I'm not shooting more than 1.5 inch cutting diameter. So it's not trying to bend as big of a piece of material back. I don't think I would shoot personally. I'm trying that Carnivore for a reason, because I know there's 2 shorter blades that I know will open up and 2 longer ones that if I run into an issue might not. And I'm using that in a scenario where I'd feel comfortable with my penetration even on a failure. That broadhead hopefully will do well, and I'm hunting in a situation where I may kill an elk with it. So, but that's a front deploy with a 2-inch blade on one side. I personally think rear deploy is a more effective tool. I think it loses less energy, and I think it cuts a bigger hole because of the distance between the ferrule pushes stuff before it gets to the actual blade, which is why you're getting that giant gashing hole, which you also have to go back and look at that and go, okay, well, how much energy did I lose before it started to cut? Because I was pushing stuff before it cut. But I do think rear deploy is a more effective tool. I hate to say that being like a huge Grim Reaper seller, but I also sell smaller cutting diameter Grim Reapers most of the time. I don't recommend the bigger ones on elk, because most people buying stuff from me are buying it for elk hunting because we live in an area where there's a lot of elk around.
Yeah.
So the majority are looking that route. But rear deploy, but you have to compare apples to apples. If we're talking 2-inch to 2-inch, yeah, rear deploy is probably going to have less energy loss.
There's a bunch more questions coming in now that are good, but for some reason, as I'm scrolling, it's like jumping them out of my hand.
Yeah, they're coming in fast. So
go ahead, James. You can ask one if you see a good one.
There's been a couple comments on if any of us like Sever broadheads, and I'll just say I've never shot one, so I don't have input.
Well, the Sever was the. Does anybody remember the Ulmer Edge?
Yeah, Ulmer
Edge. That's what it is. So Rusty Ulmer designed that broadhead, and way back in the day, Dan Evans and Rusty worked together for a couple years on it, and Dan got to a point that they couldn't come to a financial agreement that made it feasible to keep selling the broadhead. So Rusty took it for himself because Rusty wanted that broadhead for his own use, got as many as he wanted, and didn't really care if it ended up being sold to somebody again. And they tried, I think, 6 or 7 different places before Easton took it up as a direct-to-consumer product. I think you'd see Sever 10 times as big as it is right now if they would have went dealer with it instead of direct.
Yeah,
I've had many conversations with higher up people over there about that you need to do something different here because you actually have a very good product. I think that broadhead is very well designed. I think it's one of the best mechanical broadhead designs that I really don't get to play with because I can't sell them. But I know the Ulmer Edge, and I shot the Ulmer Edge. They made a steel version of it that I don't remember if it ever even went to market, but I bought everything they had when they closed it out. from Dan, because I've known Dan since he was in college. We've been friends for a really long time. And I personally kept like 60 of the steel ones because they made a deep 6 steel 100 grain. And I shot VAPs with deep 6 inserts in them and that thing in there. And it was really, really lethal. It flew really good. You could lock the blades in place for practice so you don't actually dull your blades. The screw only weighed like 3 grains. It really didn't change your impact point until you got out to a long distance. And it was really durable, but the flight characteristics were awesome. It doesn't put as big of a hole in it as like a Rage does because the blade stays up towards the top. It doesn't slide back. So you don't get as much stretch, but I think it'll out-penetrate just about any mechanical broadhead made in the 1.5. I think there's a lot of positives to that. The only negative is it's still a 2-blade cut, so the wound is going to close a little easier than a 3-blade would. But that's my only downside I would give to it.
So I have a sad story about a sever. So I've killed 3 deer with severs. I've killed one with the 1.5, one with the wider one. I can't remember if it's a 2.0 or a 2.1. And then I pulled an arrow out of my quiver sitting in the ground blind, and I loaded it into my bow, and I shot a doe, and I got a full pass through. And when I went out there, I realized that I had grabbed one that I had forgotten to take the
screw out of.
pin out of. The doe still died because I hit her in the heart.
Sure.
But I literally got a full pass through, and it didn't deploy. So those ears that are on there, yeah. Felt really bad about that one. She took a little bit longer than normal.
Yeah, you think? Yeah. You basically shot for the field point with a dull edge.
Yeah. Yeah. Full pass through, 30 yards, 31 yards.
Sure.
A field tip will get you a pass through for sure. You know, yeah. I saw a question about what release we all shoot. I shoot the Carter BK Target, which has not been made for probably a decade, but it's my favorite release. And Josh, if you have one at the shop, I will buy it. Or if you have any, I'll buy all of them. I have looked far and wide to find one of these. I've asked Carter themselves.
Yeah.
Every bow shop, nobody has them.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. I don't now, but I did like a year ago. I came across two. I had a BK Target, 18 or 17. Like they've been making that thing forever. But yeah, if I find one, I'll give you a call. I swear.
Appreciate that.
If somebody rolling in with one, I'll try to buy it from them.
I'll pay top dollar. I'll pay top dollar for it. So try to get me one.
I'm shooting a Stan Axis personally right now, and an Onyx C. I'll use the Onyx C in ground blinds and tree stands, and the Stan Axis for everything else.
Yeah, and I'm shooting that Onyx, the brass one.
Mm-hmm.
Have you messed with the clicker one at all?
Yeah, I have. I got an Onyx C 2 weeks before they came out. Joel came over here on his way through to Montana, and we did a video on it, and they sent an extra one for me to play with, and I've been shooting that ever since. I shot that at all the tacks. And I will use it in a ground blind and tree stand, and I think it's a phenomenal product. They just don't make a good strap system for that release, and I am not going running and gunning with something that is not strapped to my wrist and open hook anymore.
Actually, if you go to bowdisciples.com and look, the guy, one of Bruce's employees makes a strap called the Native Archery Strap, and it's pretty cool, and a lot of my friends that shoot Onyx will run it on there. So check that out. It has like a pocket where you can like tuck the release so it stays out of the way, and then you just shake it and it pops out. So check it out. They're $50 and we'll ship them all over.
Yeah, I'll take a look.
All right, we should do this again at some point, and we should start taking questions much earlier in the night. But my phone is nearly dead. I have not had dinner, and I also need a shower. So we're going to call it quits. Everybody, go follow James at Bow Disciples. Go follow MFJJ at, are you Podium Archer or what? Podium Archer.
Podium Archer.
You need
Archer. And I know, but you look at my analytics and people aren't searching my name.
Really?
Now, yeah, they're not. They're not searching MFJJ. They're searching Podium Archer more than they're searching MFJJ.
Oh,
I was
right,
shocked.
well.
Like Tim told me to look at it, and I'm like, you've got to be shitting me. People on our podcast search his name over my name on there.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know. I remember the conversation we had. I was sitting in the hot tub that day, and you're like, you need to ditch all this shit and just be MFJJ and none of this other stuff. And Dan said the same thing to me like a month ago, but the analytics show opposite of it. But I'm tempted to do it anyway.
I feel like if you just did it, like I feel like if you lived it for 3 months and you literally had mfjj.com as the website.
There's an Asian company that owns that domain, and I sent them an email and an offer for it, and they didn't even reply to me. And I sent them like I'll give you $10,000 for mfjj.com, and they didn't even reply. Yeah. I'm like, well, this is out of my budget.
Yeah, I think Kafaru.com told Aaron they would take $1 million for Kafaru.com, and it's literally just sitting as a nothing website. So shitty.
Yeah. Same with mfjj.com.
I'm sure
this website's for sale.
They know what your value is. All right, so we're gonna post this on my YouTube channel. In the future, if these get big enough, we may just start posting them on anybody who's on on channel if it's worth it. But guys, thank you. Tons of really good information in this one, and obviously very much enjoy just chatting with the both of you. So thank you guys for coming on.
It's been a pleasure, guys.
For sure. And Josh, good to meet you. And I'm sure at some point we'll all get to shoot together and make some videos, beer bong and beers or whatever. So we'll see.
Oh boy. I'm down for that. We can do it.
All right. See you guys.
Later, guys.